your concept of yourself is built out of the narratives that we create out of our experience. And so if you want to change how you feel about yourself, you have to start peeling back those layers of narrative.
Your income, your impact, your relationship with creativity, productivity in the world, it all comes down to your relationship with yourself.
A simple moment in the morning where you set an intention, it impacts your confidence, it impacts your mood all day long. Just that simple moment.
People's admiration, people's gratitude towards you will never fill you up. It's your own inside.
It's not a matter of changing the environment, it's changing myself.
How do we begin to establish what we think is good? What does it mean to be better? And you come to this from an ethical place, and I know that you don't want to like direct people too much and say believe this or whatever, but what are some jumping off points? Like, is it to go read philosophy? You said that you approach life as a Buddhist. Like, how can people begin to build that framework for themselves? Because what I'm really trying to get to is I feel like you have to have a base belief of some kind upon which things stack, but I don't think people think about that. And even just pointing them in a direction of how to begin defining that for themselves, I think would be super helpful.
Yeah, so for me, I found that, I talk about Kant in the book. I was very inspired by Kant's moral philosophy. Basically, he has this principle called the formula of humanity, which is essentially, it's so simple, but it kind of explains everything. He says that always act in such a way that you never merely treat a person as a means, but always as an end. And what that means is like, don't use people, like anything you do, the whole point of what you do, like the end goal of what you do should always be a person, whether it's yourself or somebody else. So like, if you're like kind of misleading somebody or just saying something to somebody just to get them to like, I don't know, give you some money or, make them like you a little bit, under that principle, like that is not growth. That is not success. Any basic stuff like lying, cheating, stealing, like all of those are examples of using people as a means to some other end rather than treating the person as an end of themselves. So I when I came across that principle, it just, for me, it kind of blew me back on just how universal and powerful and useful it was. Because I spent a lot of time writing about dating and relationships, and I was coming from a place where my philosophy around relationships was always like, the thing that screws relationships up is treating people as a means, is being transactional in your relationships. And so when I found that Kant stuff, I was like, damn, this dude gets it.
How do you advise is probably a better way to ask it. How do you advise people to go on that journey? Like, it feels like not the sum total of what you're trying to accomplish, because it's pretty clear that you're very efficient at alleviating immediate pain. But in terms of helping people find that spiritual awakening, what does that pursuit look like? How do people begin, or how do they recognize markers on the path? How do they know they're making progress?
A beginning is who we choose to spend time with. There's a simple analogy. If you take an iron rod and put it in fire and keep it there a little, it becomes red and hot like fire. And if you touch that rod, it's the same as touching fire. And if you put the same rod in ice and keep it there, then it becomes as cold as ice. So what we associate with, we so much become influenced by that. And we see throughout the ages, people's spiritual awakening is due to circumstances of life where we feel a need for something deeper, something beyond just all the external experiences I'm having. There must be something more to life than this. In India, I'm in villages with very simple, poor people. And I'm also with millionaires and billionaires. And I really don't see too much difference, because if a person doesn't find satisfaction in their own hearts and in the purpose of their life, they're not going to be happy people, whatever they have or whatever they don't have. Because the real treasure is within ourselves. So when we feel that need, when we feel that that purpose in our life to find something deeper, something beyond, then we connect with people who can inspire, enlighten us to make that connection.
The human brain has a phenomenon called transient hypofrontality. The neocortex, as you know, it's the seat of thinking. It's our monkey mind. It's all the chattering. It's the stuff that says, Tom, you can't do it. Robin, you can't do it. What would they think? What if I fail? What if I get laughed at? That's all the neocortex. It's the crown jewel of brain development. Not our primitive brain, crown jewel. But there's no genius in there. And here's what I mean. When we get away from distraction and we find our Menlo Park, or we go work in a quiet place and we get lost, the neocortex actually shuts down. That's why it's called transient hypofrontality. For a short period of time, our thinking shuts down. The whole model is in the book. And we actually go from brain waves at beta down to alpha, down to theta, and maybe even delta. And we stop thinking and we go into flow. In other words, the advanced minds of the world, the great geniuses, Galileo, Da Vinci, Steve Jobs, they weren't in the neocortex. They got away from the world for bursts of time, which allowed them to access the human capability we all have to get into flow state and access insights that they went out in the world and then executed on with a world-class team, which totally changed the game.
I wonder if I can use this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 thing to get control of my thought patterns. Not my behavior patterns, my thought patterns. Yes, you can. Wow. So we're gonna build this conversation, because I want to start with something we can all relate to, and that is, how do you stop worrying and how do you stop listening to self-doubt? This is how you're going to do it. So all day long, you're going to have moments where your thoughts drift. And I use that word on purpose, because for me, there is a physical sensation when you start to use the 5-second rule and you start to wake up, not only on time in the morning, but you wake up to your life and the opportunities in your life. Your thoughts drift. Like, you'll just be hanging out with your friends and then suddenly you're like, I'm not sure that person likes me anymore. I haven't heard from my kids lately. I wonder if they're dead, or, as a check, like, you just start worrying about stuff. Why? Because it's a habit. Because when you're not paying attention, your brain shifts from you being a decision maker and paying attention to you just kind of spinning things on autopilot, and one of your habits is worrying. The second you wake up and you notice, holy cow, I'm talking some negative garbage to myself right now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You've just shifted the part of the brain that you're using. You've shifted from the basal ganglia, which is where your habit loops are spinning, and you've awakened your prefrontal cortex. You've also interrupted that pattern. Now what you're going to do, because your mind is actually ready to receive a different thought because of the counting, now you can put in an anchor thought. Like, if you have a mantra, if you've got a vision about the way that your business is going to turn out in 5 years, if you just have a thought that makes you really happy and proud, insert that. Now, why does this work? It works because of the counting. And I'm not kidding. We know, based on research, that positive thinking alone, not effective. In some instances, trying to force yourself to think positive can actually make the worries worse. Why? Well, the reason why is because it's really hard to just change the channel. What we have to do first is basically interrupt it and turn off the TV, and then turn it back on with the prefrontal cortex awakened. So the counting is essential. And so you can start using this today. You catch yourself talking garbage to yourself? Because we all know if I were to put a speaker on your head and broadcast, you would be sitting here in the audience, you'd be in an insane asylum because the crap that you say to yourself is insane. And the problem is we listen to it. You'll be in a sales meeting and you'll be undermining yourself. They're not going to buy. Oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. You're not even present. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Switch it back. Get back to that vision that you have about toasting your success or this customer being really happy or you being proud of yourself. Whatever that vision may be, you can control your thoughts. And this is not just us talking about it. This is a tool that you can use.
You have a relationship with yourself the way that you have with somebody else.
Yeah.
Which is really fascinating. Tell me about that. Like, what do you mean by that? And then like the whole notion of, I forget the exact word you used, but you said, I approach this like a Buddhist. The self is an illusion. I don't think you said that, but it was like, it made me feel that way.
Yes. I said it's an arbitrary construct, which, yeah, illusion. I think, so our relationship with ourselves, like essentially what self-esteem is or self-worth is, basically, let me back up for a second. The feeling brain, so the thinking brain thinks in terms of like logic, cause and effect, correlations, things like that. The feeling brain thinks in terms of importance. It thinks in terms of values. So some things are very valuable and worthy of being pursued, and other things are very, very not valuable, and they should be avoided. And the feeling brain kind of designates, almost a value score for everything, every experience, every potential experience that we can consider, including ourselves. So our idea of what our self is just another idea. The same way, living in New York is an idea, and there is a certain value I place on that, and that idea has logical connections to all sorts of things. That who I am as Mark Manson is simply a constructed idea in my mind, and as a constructed idea, my feeling brain has either positive or negative valuations and feelings for Mark Manson. When people have a low valuation of themselves, when their feeling brain thinks that their identity is not valuable and have negative emotions about it, we call that low self-esteem. And when the idea of ourself, our feeling brain has a high valuation of it and has positive feelings for it, we call that high self-esteem. And so a lot of like therapeutic work for many decades was kind of almost obsessed of like just trying to get people's this relationship between your feeling brain and your conception of your identity to get the needle to move from negative to positive, because there are all sorts of positive repercussions of that. But ultimately, your concept of yourself is built out of the narratives that we create out of our experience. So all of the experiences that I've had, or all the experiences that you have, your idea of Tom is just this vast collection of narratives that you've constructed around your own experiences. And it's layer on top of layer on top of layer on top of layer. And your feeling brain has a certain, valence for those experiences. And so if you want to change how you feel about yourself, you have to start peeling back those layers of narrative and start getting down into the deepest, earliest ones, because those are often the most impactful and influential.
Hope you enjoyed this episode, brought to you by our sponsors at BetterHelp. Go to betterhelp.com/impact to get 10% off your first month. Enjoy the episode.
What would you say are the three, if somebody wants to be a truly effective leader, what are 3 traits that they should cultivate in themselves?
Know yourself. I mean, Jack Welch of General Electric said it really well. Don't lose yourself on the way to the top. Warren Buffett said, there'll never be a better you than you. So great leaders, again, it's those 4 interior empires, working on yourself, knowing what you want to stand for, knowing what you want said about you on the last hour of your last day, knowing your core values, your top 5 core values, knowing those, knowing your weaknesses, knowing your strengths. I mean, a lot of leadership talk isn't about that, but starting with your character and your self-identity, that is really important for a leader. I'd say the second thing for a leader would be, well, getting big things done. You know, you mentioned it in the introduction. It's like ferocious, like a warrior when it comes to execution. Like great leadership is less talk and more do. You know, it doesn't really matter what the chatter. I mean, it's all about execution, implementation, and application. So they get things done. And we live in a world where, you know, we pull out the phone, people, oh, I'm going to get this done and I'm going to get that done. We say to people, oh, I'll send you a book. It doesn't get done. Even worse, we lose self-respect from the promises we make to ourselves that we break. That's where it all starts. Like, it's so, you know this, it's so important. Your income, your impact, your relationship with creativity, productivity, and the world, it all comes down to your relationship with yourself. So that would be the second thing about leadership. It's like execution and don't break promises.
How do you help people not begin to erode their self-confidence? And maybe the right place to start with that is, where does self-confidence come from?
Right, which is important because there's no relationship between that and eroding your self-confidence. In other words, self-confidence is really self-trust. So the first thing is, the people I know that are really happy are very self-aware. In fact, the best entrepreneurs I know are very self-aware. They're aware of their shortcomings, right? They want to improve them. They want to get to the next version of themselves all the time. And so for me, self-confidence comes because I didn't have it. And I think anytime you meet somebody like yourself or myself who might now appear self-confident, it's because I really had to find tools and resources because I was so insecure and shy and introverted. So I had to find techniques and resources to build that up in me. And for me, it's very simple. It's the promises that I keep to myself. If I have a habit over and over of beginning to stack one on top of the other, of keeping promises I make to me, not other people. In other words, the minute you begin to get external in your life, worrying about what other people think about you, right? You've lost all control. And it never fills you up. And people's admiration, people's gratitude towards you will never fill you up. It's your own. It's your own inside. And so for me, self-confidence comes from keeping the promises I make to myself. And the other part of it is being aware I'm doing it. In other words, most people don't give themselves enough credit all the time. They're very aware of these 20% things and not aware of the 80, right? And that's why the dosage is so important too. You've nailed it. It should be 80-20. Right? Because people get addicted to this. I'm not good at this. People don't like this about me. I don't feel good. Instead of focusing on the 80 and stacking it up. Wow, I did eat what I said I was going to today. I did get up when I said I was going to. I made the amount of phone calls. I treated people in such a way I promised myself. It's not just doing those things. It's rewarding it. It's being aware of it and stacking that up. When I work with athletes, the successful athletes I work with, when they're in a slump, it's never that they can't hit a ball anymore or make a shot or swing a golf club. They've lost their self-confidence. Somewhere along the way, they've lost the ability to focus on the things they are great at and stacking those promises they make to themselves. And the way I get them to break their slump is not correcting their swing or getting them positive. It's getting them to acknowledge the small promises, showing up to batting practice early, hitting that extra bucket of balls, beginning to reward themselves for the extra promises they keep to themselves, puts them back in a state of self-confidence. All of a sudden, they're hitting the ball great again.
It's really an interesting trick of the mind. And like you, I have this similar sense of, I want to be able to want it for people.
Yeah.
And the one thing in my life that I am very grateful for is that I know how to build desire. I know how to go down the process of wanting something.
What is that process for you of desire? Because what I've found in this book is, here's the thing for most people, and I'm hoping that your process will attack this. What I've discovered that is heartbreaking is the average person cannot celebrate themselves. I'm going to ask everybody who's watching this to tomorrow morning stand in front of the mirror. We're going to unpack this whole thing and try to high five yourself. And most
really
people,
fast, give people the science behind why that's meaningful.
So I have this habit of every single morning, I stand in front of the mirror and I take a moment and I raise my hand and I give my reflection a high five. And there's so much science behind this. So instead of seeing yourself, right, and having this moment in the mirror, you know what the average person does? First of all, we beat ourselves down. So I would look in the mirror for 40 some years and be like, oh my God, my freaking jowls look like saddlebags on a goddamn horse going in the Grand Canyon. My eyes my neck is only striped. My one boob's hanging lower than the other. I look like shit, my gray hair. Like, I start bringing myself down. And when you start going down that road with your reflection, then your thoughts go to, I didn't get to that email. I forgot to text Lisa back. Oh my gosh, the dog still needs to be walked. I've got 9 minutes for my first Zoom call. You're now checking out. And that moment in the mirror every morning could be a profound moment where you lift yourself up and you check back in with your intention. So the first piece of research, and this is recent from Harvard Business School, is that a simple moment in the morning where you set an intention about who you're going to be today impacts productivity, how you show up as a leader. It impacts your confidence. It impacts your mood all day long. Just that simple moment of setting an intention. So that's research number one. Instead of standing in front of the sink in your bathroom and criticizing your appearance or mindlessly going on autopilot, check back in and let's teach you to make it a habit to lift yourself back up.
You were chanting, and you said that it opened something inside of you, and you felt connected to that eternal spirit. And you said you expected it to fade away, but for some reason that one was deeper and more profound than you'd ever had before. Is there a way to work towards that? Is it the repetition of the mantras? Is it belief in the words behind the mantras? Is it being out in nature? Like, how can people, really walk that path that you're talking about?
Our spiritual practice is like a foundation. It's kind of like charging your cellular phone. There's so many functions that a cellular phone has these days, but you need to charge it for all of them to be activated. So we may have so many functions in our life, with our families, with our occupation, with the world around us, with our health. But in order for them to be spiritually connected, we need that connection. And that's what our spiritual practice is for, and that's what being with enlightening people helps us with. And that's prayer, meditation. In our meditation, we chant this beautiful mantra.
And are you trying to clear your mind when you meditate? Are you trying to soak in a certain feeling, remember that you're connected? Like, if you had to say in one sentence what the purpose of your particular meditation practice is, what is the purpose?
Purification. Let's use the example of the mind, which you just spoke. The mind is like a mirror. We're the self. And we're seeing the world and we're seeing ourselves through the mirror of our mind. We all have the experience, Tom, that when we're agitated, nothing really looks good anymore. And when we're in a really good mood, kind of everything looks good. Yes, when you're in a good mood, the trees look so sweet. And when you're in a very bad mood, you just couldn't care less about the trees. So we're seeing ourselves as a reflection through the mirror of the mind, and we're seeing the whole world in a similar way. The purpose of a mirror is to see ourselves. But when the mirror is covered by layers and layers of dust and dirt and debris, that's all we see is that dust and dirt and debris.
What do I need to survive? What do I absolutely need? Because the want changes every hour. We want pizza today, tomorrow it's pasta, the next week it's sushi. Next day it's like we want onions with tomatoes. I mean, like you're driving yourself crazy with this want thing. The average person buys a car and 6 months later, I should have gotten the blue one. Well, maybe I'll get a different color next time. Yeah, I feel the same. I mean, now in my life, I feel the same thing with houses. You get a house, you go, it's cool, maybe a couple of years, I'm gonna move. So that want is never quite satisfied because it's a fleeting thought that's going on in your head, and you just, it's also attached to sensationalism, which is king and queen of America. There's 80 million ads everywhere you turn and look, turn on TV, radio, whatever. So you got to be able to turn that noise off to get to, what do I need?
Talk to me about that as a process. How do people actually do that, especially now as it's escalating, it's getting worse? And this is
Social media is the king of it.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. It's telling you who you should date, who you should marry. It tells you everything you should do. Tom needs a girl like this.
So how do we turn it down?
Well, I think you have to be able to turn off the noise. You have to be in a quiet place, and you just got to really get into yourself. One of my big things in life now, people actually have no idea who they are. So if you don't know who you are, and I know people 80 years old that don't know who they are. I know some 80-year-old boys that still haven't turned the corner to man. So if you don't know who you are, how can you know how to navigate your life? So one of my other phrases in life that I love now, this is your mission, Tom. Should you choose, you, Tom, nobody else, you choose, not your parents, not him, you choose to accept it. Do you know who you are, and have you accepted that this is who I am? This is what I need. Most people don't even think about that.
Mental health is a huge priority in my life, and I encourage everyone to prioritize it. And one of the best ways to follow through on healthy mental health habits is by working with a licensed therapist. BetterHelp is available for clients worldwide. You can log in to your account anytime and send a message to your therapist. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches, so they make it easy and free to change therapists if needed. It's more affordable than traditional offline therapy, and financial aid is available. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. Visit betterhelp.com/impact. That's better, H-E-L-P, and join the over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. And with a special offer for our Impact Theory audience, you can get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/impact. Again, that's betterhelp.com/impact. Take care and be legendary.
Your journey was very movement oriented, which I find fascinating. And as somebody who thinks in movies, there's a moment in Forrest Gump where he has to put himself to movement in order to sort of clear his mind. So in the 60s, you're feeling deeply unsettled by what's going on with the Vietnam War. And instead of just protesting, you begin to move, and you're traveling around, you end up in Greece, you have this tremendous calling, I think you said, and you begin your journey to spiritual India. Like there's so much movement in all of that. Is there something to that? Or is it just getting out of all the things that create the illusion?
The second part. It's passing through all these things that create illusion to a higher goal, to a higher purpose, which is living an enlightened life. And each of us is an individual. My destiny, we could say, was to hitchhike from London to the Himalayas to try to find a deep, meaningful purpose in my life, a connection with spirituality, with God. But I know people who don't go anywhere, and they get much more than me. It's not a matter of where we go. It's a matter of how we try to change our own hearts. It's not a matter of changing the environment, it's changing myself.
It's just a healthy habit to develop the desire to challenge yourself in every sense, physically, mentally, emotionally. One thing I definitely started trying to do, especially recently, given like the political climate that's been going on, is I seek out articles and news sources that I disagree with, because I see the bubbles that everybody's in, and the tribal lines that everybody's drawing, and I'm horrified by it, but I also want to try my best to not succumb to that myself. And so yeah, I read sources, I read books of things I disagree with, and it changes me. It really does. It softens me. Sometimes I'll finish the book and I'm like, well, I still don't agree with them, but damn, I respect them now. Like, that's a smart person. And so that's one way I do it intellectually. But I think it's, that carries over into all areas of life. I mean, it's as simple as, if you go to the gym, it's like, challenge yourself to do something new. Take a class that, like my wife just at the age of 37 decided she wanted to learn how to swim. And she's like mortified of it, but I'm like, hell yeah, go do it. Like, that's because it's not just about swimming. It's about just developing that consistent habit of like stepping into your discomfort.
Our parents give us limitation based on their limited psychology and their emotional patterns that they learned from their parents. Then we go to school and we're taught to live in a box, think in a box, dress like everyone else. Don't sing too loudly, don't dream too big, don't be too passionate. And then our peers do the same thing to us. And then society says, oh, genius is the realm of genetics, not everyday people, which has been dismissed by some very good science. The 10,000 hour rule that we all know from Florida State University professor Anders Ericsson, it just confirms so much. So I do think we all won. I think what's happened is as we've left who we truly are, we've contracted. And now it's all about staying safe in the world versus going out there and letting our brilliance, our primal genius shine. And a lot of people just have stuffed that pain of disappointment and their doubt really deep inside. And they just are addicted to distraction and escapes because they don't want to deal with their potential that they've denied.
Let's say something traumatic happens in your childhood. That pain early on in your life causes a lot of negative emotions. And one of the things that I talk about is that anytime we feel an emotion, it compels us to do what I call equalizing, which is like, if I'm angry at you, I'm going to continue to be angry at you until I either retaliate or you apologize. Like, something needs to happen to make that anger go away. There needs to be some sort of like equalization between us. And if there is no equalization, that anger just kind of simmers and sits there forever. And one of the reasons why childhood traumas are so debilitating for people is that essentially these extremely painful experiences occur to our feeling brains while our thinking brains are still undeveloped and don't know how to explain or create meaning around that pain. So let's say something really painful happened to me now, I'd be like, oh, well, he meant well and, shit happens or whatever. But if I'm like a 5-year-old, my explanation for it only gets as far as like, I'm a bad boy, I'm a bad person, and the world hates me. And that will stick because it doesn't get equalized, and it'll stick for the rest of my life. And the problem is that we forget that painful thing happened. So we just kind of go through life with this feeling of inferiority and pain that lingers that we can't really put an explanation to or explain away. And so the process of therapy is basically unraveling a lot of our experiences until we get back to that original experience. And with our adult thinking brain, we can now put meaning to that pain that is helpful to us, essentially.